everybody. Byron Flagg. I'm with the law firm of Gray Robinson. I'm based in the Gainesville office. Semper Paratus to my fellow Coast Guardsmen. I got involved in this area of law because I was in the Coast Guard Reserves before I went to law school. And then in the middle of law school, 9/11 happened and I got activated. And so I was doing Coast Guard active duty, finishing law school, and so law and Coast Guard active duty meshed. And it's been fascinating, and I'm a Floridian, and so these topics are really important to me. Chapter 327 of the Florida statutes is kind of where we lawyers who work on these issues live, in that area, and that chapter. There's some other areas too, but that's the main chapter. And I kind of think of chapter 327 as the toolbox, the legal toolbox that we can all look at to try to address the issues. And, you know, we've studied and written about the history of the evolution of chapter 327, and think of chapter 327 as really kind of a reactionary chapter. It's reactionary because the legislature is always trying to react to all these problems that we as the boating community are bringing to the legislature, bringing to our local governments, trying to figure out, we've got these problems. There's a new problem. Somebody's come up with a, Airbnb on a floating vessel. How do we regulate that? So that's what chapter 327 is. It's always changing. Our experts at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission are always trying to address the regulations and the statutes the best they can. And so what I'm going to focus on is one specific section in chapter 327, which is one of the tools in the toolbox. And that's Florida statute section 327.46. Let's see, where's the controller for this? And it's right here. Ah, okay. No, that's not working. It's lawyer proof. Yeah, for some reason I don't have control over the mouse on the computer. It's locked up.
Now try
Yeah, no, the mouse pad is not working.
Let's go there. All right, now if you can hit the space bar, you should be able to use the arrows now.
Okay.
It's something that hasn't, all the technology that hasn't changed in 20 years.
Yeah. All right. Let me.
Just use the.
All right. Okay, there we go. Okay, so piece of cake. Thank you. All right. So there you go. The tools. So Florida statute 327.46. If you read through that section, it ends up talking about Florida Administrative Code. And so what's really important that are, if you all don't know, Florida Administrative Code is our agency administrative regulations. The Florida statute tells state agencies, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, which is not a normal state agency, it's a constitutional agency. But agencies like Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission have authority to implement the purposes of statutes through rulemaking. And Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is doing that, enforcing or creating rules, implementing the purpose of this statute under these chapters under the Florida Administrative Code. So write those down. I'm not going to get into details about those, but those are important tools, and I'm going to come back to them and why they're relevant. So boating restricted areas, what are they? They're not anchorages. They're not anchoring limitation areas like Brendan was just talking about. Boating restricted areas are exactly what that means. It's an area where boating is restricted in some manner. Typically, this is referring to speed and manner of travel over the water to deal with vessel traffic. And the reason, and I'm gonna get into a little bit more about who has authority to make what types of boating restricted areas. But the underlying authority as to why boating restricted areas can be created in the first place, either by ordinance or by administrative rule, is because it's for public safety. But it's not that simple. There are some types of boating restricted areas that have to be approved, reviewed and approved by Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And under their regulatory rules to implement that type of a boating restricted area it's required to be based on competent substantial evidence. And that's where sometimes you need to have a little bit more legal analysis and understanding. And I'll get into that, what that means and why that's significant. So right here is the first paragraph of that statute, and that's the underlying public purpose. I don't need to read it to you, but it's there in my PowerPoint. I think our PowerPoints are going to be available to you, so you'll have that there, but you can always go straight to that statute and read it. It's basically means that we can do this for public safety. Who can create boating restricted areas? Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, just like I mentioned. And they can do that through their rulemaking authority. And chapter 68D-24 is the chapter where they do that. And if you ever take a look at it, you'll see that chapter has everything from protection zones for springs to specific boating restricted areas and geographic points all over Florida. It's a neat chapter to look at because you can walk through every county in Florida where there is a boating restricted area, and it will show you those restricted areas. In a lot of cases, there's actually diagrams to show you exactly how that restricted area is regulated. But more importantly, for this audience, what I want to highlight for you all is the types of boating restricted areas that municipalities and counties, otherwise known as our local governments, can implement. And this is important because you all in the boating community and with IFAS and University of Florida and our local FWC folks and even our Coast Guard Auxiliary, you're interacting with the public, you're educating the public's asking you questions. Why can't we do something about this? Or why can't we do something about that? This is a dangerous area. You know, why can't our local government just pass a law? Well, here's the answer. And you have to tell them it's not that simple. And you can thank the Florida legislature for that, because the Florida legislature has largely preempted how local governments can regulate boating activity on water. There's a few types of boating restricted areas where the Florida legislature has said, you know what, these types, we're going to let local governments go ahead and regulate it by ordinance, and they do not need to go through our experts at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for these types of boating restricted areas. I refer to these as, oh crap, watch out ordinances, because they're so dangerous. These are sort of no-brainers. Let's let local governments regulate these. And so those are, I've kind of described them here. This is paraphrasing. It's in the statute. We're a little short on time, so I won't read through all of that, but basically it's in close proximity to places where the public is frequently using something, a facility, and there could be some dangerous situations. What always comes to my mind is an incident when I was in the Coast Guard Station Miami Beach. A guy on a wave runner was high speed through an area that was a restricted area, and he hit a low-lying bridge, killed him. So legislature says those kinds of things, let our local governments regulate those. And here's the parameters. Then there's other types of ordinances where the legislature said, okay, some types of boating restricted areas, these ones are a little bit more unique. They're more local. We need to make sure our experts at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission are reviewing what the local government is trying to do here. And these things are like vessel exclusion zones in certain places. such as creating a designated bathing area or swimming area. And so these things, these types of ordinances, the local government actually has to apply through an application process to FWC and provide competent substantial evidence to support what they want to do with competent substantial evidence. And competent substantial evidence this comes from case law, which, because it's been litigated, it's basically the lowest standard of evidence, evidential review in our state law system. It basically means if it's competent, if it can be reasonably inferred, and if it's basically common sense. But you still need something like an affidavit, photographs, boating accident reports, incident reports, things like that to show we've got a problem here. We need to create a boating restricted area for this particular purpose. Quick case study in point. This is something that I've been involved with in the past. I've represented a nonprofit organization called Virginia Key Alliance down in Miami, which is a conglomeration of paddlers and different rowers and different users of the Miami Marine Stadium. Here, City of Miami tried to create a boating restricted area by creating a slow speed, no wake area throughout the whole basin. If you don't know, the Miami Marine Stadium Basin is an incredible place. Just Google it. It was an area dredged out like a Circus Maximus for speedboats in the 1960s. Dredged, you couldn't do that anymore. Dredged right out of Virginia Key, Mangrove Island. But anyway, it still exists. It's the perfect place to anchor, play, party. People act foolish. During COVID, the area was being used more than ever. It was crowded. It was getting dangerous. Sure enough, there were some increased incidents and there were 2 fatalities. Those were the things that the local organization that I was working with were able to start pointing to as competent substantial evidence to help the City of Miami go to FWC and say, we need to establish a boating restricted area here. Well, Miami had passed an ordinance in 2014, but they hadn't followed that process. So there was this ordinance in place. Miami Marine Patrol had questions about whether it was enforceable or not. FWC had told them, yeah, you didn't go through the process. And then they finally did it. Now there's signs up and things are much safer. A couple photographs I've taken of the area. Here's a quick this wave runner shooting past us. And in my slide, there's some links to some news articles about this exact issue. It's a great example of a boating restricted area, how political it can be. You can look at those yourselves. And advice for advocates trying to work with local governments, set up meetings with your local staff, your city county managers, your city or county attorneys, and you can help educate them on this because it's an area that a lot of attorneys are not working on. And I'll let Tom deal with this last slide.
Well, too late, we answered the question.